Good afternoon, relatives. Please join me in welcoming the president of Navajo Technical University and College Board's former trustee, Dr. Elmer Guy.
Yate. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to extend my appreciation to the Shakopee and other Indigenous nations for convening on their homelands. It's such a pleasure to join you at this year's NASAI conference, one of my favorite College Board event of the year. I'm Elmer Guy. I serve as president of Navajo Technical University, currently chair of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and a former trustee of the College Board. In my former role serving College Board, I was very impressed by the strategies employed and championed to ensure student has the chance to find academic and future success. Yet we know that solutions to the complex issues impacting students and classrooms across the academic landscape face many barriers. When developing the NASAI over 15 years ago, College Board understood that educators at every level and individuals familiar with the challenges Native student populations confront must come together to find meaningful solutions. This initial collaborative experiment has grown to what you see before you. I could not be more proud to join you in improving our educational institutions. As someone who has devoted my career to this work, I wanted to share a bit about what this work looks like in the context of tribal colleges and universities. TCUs are a unique group of 15 institutions in 15 states chartered by their local tribal governments. They play a crucial role in providing higher education opportunities to Native communities while preserving and celebrating their cultural heritage. Our most effective leaders across our institutions understand that culturally responsive leadership requires creating an inclusive and empowering environment that respects and incorporates Indigenous traditions, languages, and worldviews. Cultural heritage are celebrated, not hidden from view, fostering unique learning opportunities that make a difference. I encourage each of you to utilize a forward-thinking, culturally responsible approach that honors the values, tradition, and knowledge systems of this traditionally underserved population. As someone born and raised on the Navajo reservation, I am deeply connected to my family's heritage. I learned from my grandparents at an early age that successful leadership in my community is rooted in the heritage. The principles, values, wisdom of my Navajo culture continue to serve as an inspiration to uplift Indigenous youth. And my experience is not unique. This trait is reflected in our best leaders across the TCU environment. Looking out across this year's group of NASAI attendees, please take pride in knowing you're a valuable part of the solution. Understanding best practices and collaborating with your peers on new ideas and strategies to bring back to your local communities will further propel our students to overcome long-standing academic barriers to future success. Your dedication is a beacon of inspiration for me, your fellow educators, and institutional leaders. Our work is far from complete, yet the progress we've made collectively is having an impact. Future generations will continue to have improved access to programs and services that allow them to blaze their own path and define success in their own lives. Once again, thank you so much for attending NASAI. Your passion continues to invigorate and inspire me, and I hope you're able to take the lessons learned back to your local communities. Our students deserve it. Thank you.
Please welcome the Senior Assessment Specialist for College Board, Trent Williams, and Associate Director of Student and Family Marketing, Tema Menes.
Ho Tema Menes Nedishisu Neg Gekimasu Ayui College Board Nemeshkwaki. Hi everyone, my name is Tema Menes and I come from the Meskwaki and Sac and Fox Nations and I currently work at College Board.
Tuma Naholamanumpa Sahorchifa Trent Williams, College Board in Toxalili. Hello, I'm Trent Williams. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. I'm a senior assessment specialist here at College Board.
This year's NASAI kicked off with We Will Speak, a documentary about the revitalization of the Cherokee language and a personal discussion with Cherokee filmmaker and language teacher Sean Duncan. Additionally, Dr. Larry Kimura is the creator of the Language Nest model, in which Indigenous languages serve as the medium for instruction for all academic subjects, is the recipient of this year's Henrietta Mann Award.
The NASAI National Committee didn't set out with a focus on language revitalization when planning this year's program. Instead, that focus developed organically as we engaged with thought leaders from across Turtle Island and Hawaii who are doing the good, hard work of ensuring that our young people continue to speak the languages of their ancestors.
So it's fitting that Dr. Anton Treuer is also joining us. Dr. Treuer is a citizen of the Leak Lake Band of Ojibwe and professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University. Dr. Treuer has published books on a wide range of subjects, and I hope everyone has gotten their copy, from Indigenous history to the Ojibwe language for K-12 students and adults alike, and additionally has helped develop the Ojibwe Rosetta Stone instruction program.
To borrow a phrase from the title of his 2020 book, The Language Warrior's Manifesto, How to Keep Our Languages Alive No Matter the Odds, Dr. Treuer is himself a language warrior. Please join us in welcoming him as he explores how students benefit when Indigenous languages and communities are foregrounded in the educational experience.
Ahau miigwech. Kawe maji taya nui Ojibwe majina. We wendigo de windamunugo ge pichi miigwech wendaman and enimigwan bajayan. The Douglas Seduyan, Awian, Wagosh, Indigu Minawa Migizi, Indo Dame, Kazagasquaji Mekag, Indun Jiba. Minawa Animaji Tayan, Indajaganashimana. English? I'll use some English. So they asked me to share with you for about 40 minutes. They didn't say anything at all about using a foreign language like English. English is the foreign language. It comes from across the ocean, a country called England. It's so weird that even when natives get together, why our languages are the ones that sound weird, foreign, exotic. When's he going to say something I can understand? I'm almost to the point now where I have the deans and president convinced at Bemidji State University, where I work, that if somebody calls and asks for the Department of Foreign Languages to send them to the English department, and if somebody wants anything else, they can come see me. I'm so excited and so honored to be in your company and in community with all of you. This is a transformational time in the world and in our educational systems. In many ways, our systems are very colonial. Colonization is taking one language, one religion, one culture, and using it to supplant all the others. It's about erasure, which helps explain why, among other things, for those steeped in the culture of erasure, why so many people are scared about things like white erasure. And if you think about it, colonization also means employing violence to orchestrate the erasure. Of course, when you try to solve all your problems with violence, it makes a bunch of other problems. Now, why would we think that all of the problems created by the colonial way of solving problems can be solved by the colonial way of solving problems? And of course, they cannot. In spite of 500 pretty rough years, we are still here. We still have living languages. We still have vibrant cultures. And we have many people, including everyone in this room, striving to transform our educational systems into places where our people can learn about themselves as well as the rest of the world. Our work should never be simply helping Native kids navigate the gates and gaps and be really great at the whiteness. It should be helping equip them with the tools that they need to navigate and recreate the world in their future, a world that we can only imagine, but we must imagine will be a very diverse place. In our language, we have a word, Anikobijigan, and that word is used both for my great-grandparent and my great-grandchild. It spans 7 generations, Anikobijigan. 7 generations ago, our people were going through a hard time, dealing with treaties and all kinds of stuff. An almost impossible set of circumstances for Indigenous people to navigate. If you fought, it usually didn't go too well. But if you accommodated, it didn't go that much better either. And so they were thinking, what will our future generations, 7 generations from now, what are they going to need? And they thought, we're going to need sovereignty, self-rule. They thought, we're going to need land. We're going to need clean water. They're going to need our culture and our languages. 7 generations from now, no one's going to remember my name, no matter how many books I write. But if there is a chance that 7 generations from now, our children will know who they are, be equipped with a good chance for a long, healthy, happy life, I think they're going to need the very same things. Sovereignty, land, clean water, culture, language, community. If we can set them up with a chance at those things, all our strivings will be worth the effort. There's so much to think about, and there's so much to talk about. I have a short amount of time, so I'm going to take the 20,000-foot view, but I will be sticking around so we can extend the conversation. And of course, you have all of your sessions to dig deeper into the mechanics, things, programs, ideas, and so forth that can help kind of pollinate the garden we are all trying to grow and harvest from. I wear many hats. Among them, I sit on the school board for the world's first Ojibwe language medium school. What that means is, I think immersion can kind of be a buzzword. It means different things to different people. What this means is that the tribal language is the language of instruction. They do not use English for any of it. Whether they're teaching about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, or if they are teaching about trigonometry, it is in the tribal language. And I've only been on the school board there for a few years, but prior to that, I did a lot of work with the organization. They've been around for over 20 years now. And I used to do assessments of teachers. And I remember going there to do classroom assessments several years ago. And I was pretty stunned in the early childhood program when the class began with a little 4 or 5-year-old kid saying, Buju abanuji do, gani neji weba, kagujing nogum. One of the other kids says, Anizagate. And this kid had a little kind of felt board behind him. And so he's asking, hey kids, what's going on with the weather today? And someone says, the sun's coming out. So he puts a little image up for the sun peeking out behind the clouds. Awego nenge abi, no dinana, ha mashkowani mud. He puts another one up for a strong wind. And I was watching them go, and I was thinking, I can't even get my kids to sit still for supper. There was something happening in terms of classroom management, curriculum and instruction, and those kids were operating in a language that had not been spoken in their family. It wasn't like they had 20 years in a program and then got there. I mean, granted, I was there in March, which is probably the best time to do K-12 teacher assessments because the kids are acclimated, but not too squirrely for the beginning of summer. But at the same time, it was amazing. They did something that hadn't been done since World War II. They created fluent speakers of the tribal language in that community. That's cool. However, a lot of times when we talk about Indigenous languages, people start thinking, well, that's neat. All the pretty birds singing in the forest sounds wonderful. We hope all the birds can sing. But what people often don't see is that this is not just about pretty birds singing in the forest. It's at the center of what it takes to orchestrate the positive identity development of Indigenous learners, which equals their success at everything they set their minds to, or everything we might hope they would be able to do and accomplish in their lives. There's so many things to share about how this works. First of all, broadly, for everybody of all groups, we are struggling to have kids, demonstrate the aptitudes we want them to have in academic English, mathematics, especially the STEM professions, right? So they'll do something at this school where they have an integrated curricular approach. They'll say, we're going to take the whole school and go harvest wild rice. How much rice could we fit in a canoe? The kids are like, okay, rectangle, triangle, triangle. Fill that whole canoe full of water, pour it in these cylinders, double check our measurements. Hey, we got that right. That's a pretty complex question. There's a tobacco offering. They're harvesting the wild rice. They will then bring it back to the school, and they do their music unit singing hand drum songs while they parch and jig the rice to separate the hulls. They'll do their health unit. They'll say this is, they'll feast it too, and the kids bring some home to their families, and they'll say, okay, what is the caloric content for one serving? What's its nutritional value? It's a superfood. What does that mean? In this particular reservation, we have several communities. There are 532 people there. There's 634 over there. Let's add them all up. If it's a staple food, how much would one person need? How much would we need to feed the whole population? And now some years the yield is higher, some years the yield is lower. How much would you need to sustain this population over time? And the kids are doing their calculations and they're like, wow, our ancestors did that? And the teacher's like, no, you just did that. So you have relevancy, relatability. You can give them all the science, the math, the health unit, and so forth. We can do it in our own contexts. There are so many dimensions to what it takes to unpack, decolonize, and properly indigenize the things that we do. It's one thing to say it, it's a whole nother thing to do it. The Hawaiians, and I know there are many people from Hawaii in this room, and we are honoring one of the great pioneers of the language nest model in Hawaii, pioneered this in the United States. And they will tell you that they learned a lot from our Maori brothers and sisters who pioneered this in New Zealand. But there was something pretty remarkable that happened. Only 30 years ago, the Hawaiian language was illegal for use in public schools. Today, it's one of the official languages for the whole state of Hawaii. They were down to 1,000 speakers of Hawaiian left on planet Earth. Today, there are probably 24,000 speakers. 3,000 have learned it as their first language in the home, so they tripled the population of first speakers and multiplied 24-fold the entire population of speakers. There's lots to celebrate. I'm sure we could all look around and say 24,000 speakers on a planet of billions. It's not enough. We have lots more to do. But it's pretty cool. And again, and by the way, I will connect this to what's going on in higher ed too, because throughout the spectrum, the whole thing has been a colonial enterprise and needs lots of attention and work. But, you know, they have a practice. When the kids come to school, and here they come, buses, straggling parents, humans. But the whole staff's waiting outside in rows. And then when the kids get there, the kids have to sing in their custom, asking for permission to come into school, and the staff has to sing back, and everyone gets a hug at the start of every day, aloha, which of course means hello, goodbye, and I love you. In the mainstream, I think we'd be thinking, are you serious? 45 minutes on cultural enrichment every day? The kids are awake in the morning. Make them do math. Until you realize that at Navahi, their flagship school, they have a 100% graduation rate. All the kindergartners finish high school. Anyone else got data like that? You can give all the lectures. If you don't have data like that, it's time to pay attention. Teaching someone to be something they will never be accepted to be does not work. Teaching them to embrace who they actually are does. There's more to say about what's going on in the Hawaiian experience, and I'll let them share their stories through their sessions and so forth that are part of this program, and the relationships that have been built and fostered through the history of the program. But there's some really cool stuff. They will talk about why, and their why is not the pretty birds singing in the forest, but they'll talk about Maoli, spiritual fire. Well-tended fires grow strong, neglected fires grow weak. The ancient Hawaiian custom, when someone had a new baby and about a week later the stub would fall off of the belly button, they would carve a divot in the lava beds and put it there with a rock on top and remember their spots, and the next one, and the next one. And when a girl became a woman and brought children of her own into the world, would carve a circle around her spot, and then her babies went there. It's pretty cool out at the lava beds when you can see acres and acres of divots and circles, bonding people to their ancestral line, to the Aina, Mother Earth. It's about so much more. There are many models that have been employed in K-12, and we are starting to experiment in higher ed, especially within the tribal college universe and some of the other Indigenous-focused programs, even if they are housed within other kinds of institutions. You might have heard of the expeditionary model. Certainly some of these ideas you'll see in Montessori and other things too. But the idea that a teacher does not have to be a content expert in everything. It's not a reasonable expectation. A lot of our K-12 schools, even Elk River, which is just on the other side of the Twin Cities metro, it's a suburban school district. They have 80 languages spoken by children in their district. No one's going to master all of that. But we can't take all the different shaped pegs and pound them through the square hole. We have to find a way to empower all of these kids. It lets teachers off the hook, because usually they're thinking, oh, there's Columbus in the curriculum. If I say that, The Italians are going to get really mad. If I say that, have you ever seen an angry native mom? What am I going to do? As little as possible. But if that's what happens, we have just built our educational response around the racial discomfort of the teacher rather than the needs of the children. We are not here for someone else's racial comfort or teacher comfort. We are here for the kids. What do they need? What works? What delivers the goods? We've been working hard in Minnesota. You know, it's scary out there. Some states are wholesale banning diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. You can't even talk about this stuff. Banning books, as if there has ever once been a time in the history of humans when the book banners were the good guys. For real. If you are so scared of someone's book, you are fragile. You must think your ideas are so weak that someone else reading a book about those other ideas is going to topple them away from yours. That's what the fear is. Why shouldn't we read about communism and capitalism and all the things? That doesn't mean we are embracing any particular ideology. We are understanding the systems that have impacted humans. Some people aren't there. Minnesota is politically a purple state, not just Prince and the Vikings and things like that, but politically. And even in this state, although we've had plenty of fighting and pushbacks, we have had a sweeping change to the state curricular guidelines that now are expecting teachers to talk about Indigenous people in terms not of another racial or ethnic group within the state or the kaleidoscope of identities here, but as Native nations. What are Native governments that predated the United States, existed through all of its history and continue to exist now? How are they structured? How do they work? How are they different from one another? That's a lot. We're asking science teachers to speak to Indigenous ways of knowing. And they've all only ever been trained in the scientific method. It's freaking people out. So we provided guidance. This particular document here, which was funded, by the way, this tribe where you're located right now, the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, funded $5 million to reshape the K-12 narrative about Native people within the state. And that was huge. And so it was teacher trainings, there were mini grants for educators, there were new tools, curriculum and resources, book buys, and giveaways to schools, all kinds of stuff that they were doing. It was pretty impressive. And among the documents is this one, which combed through all of the educational standards that mention Native people anywhere and have a 40-page map with each subsection of the fields, the recommended resources and tools for future guidance. It's not one-stop shop for everything you need to know, but it is a great starting place. Because the problem used to be, how do I find a needle in a haystack? And now the problem is, which needle in the stack of needles should I actually pay attention to? So there's a lot of great stuff there. There are other organizations like the Minnesota Partnership for Collaborative Curriculum, which is trying to develop free curricular resources so we don't have to buy all of our books from just Texas and California. No offense to Texas or California, but we can have things that are locally created and sourced and that can move, not at the speed of the textbook industrial complex, but at the need of the kids. So there are many efforts like this, and some of them are pretty exciting. We convened a big group of educators here in Minnesota, Ojibwe and Dakota folks, and started developing curricular, education guides and so forth that speak to what is sovereignty and how does it work and what does sovereignty mean to me, and there are all kinds of tools there. Way more stuff than people might realize. This is one of our elders from the Nigigusiminakaning First Nation. The Ojibwe communities are quite numerous. So there are 141 Ojibwe First Nations in Canada, and there are Ojibwe reservations across Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, and into Montana. It's a big group. We too didn't cross borders. That border crossed us. That is also the same for the, Blackfeet, some of the Salish groups, Potawatomi, Cree. There are many on both sides of the border. Anyways, speaking to things like how do we talk about Indigenous ways of knowing and stuff like that, she would say this: you can tell when the bear cubs are born. And there's a 6-week window between the middle of January and the end of February, and you can tell because the weather warms up and there's a fog. Even with very deep snow, there's a fog, and the fog is the breath of the bear waking up the bear cubs. Now, if you're trained in the scientific method, you'll be thinking, okay, give me a break and also show me the data set. Well, lo and behold, there have been a number of studies on bears. Cameras in bear dens, recording of all these things, and guess what? There is a 6-week variable window in which bear cubs are born. It does consistently happen when there's a warm-up in the weather, often accompanied by a fog. Now, the scientific mind would say, well, it's probably really some change in barometric pressure, which is, bringing in the warm weather and the fog and triggering a physiological response in the bears that's telling them it's time to give birth. I won't even argue those things. Here's my question, though. How did she know? How did she know? And the answer is she did not know by using the scientific method. She knew by an indigenous way of knowing, which was valid, replicable, easily tested even with the scientific method. There are 1,000 stories like that. We can't even build a building around here that lasts for 40 years. Over at Hopi, there are buildings that people have been living in since before Columbus. They had to know something. There are so many marvels, cultural, architectural, scientific, so many. But even our own people doubt the beauty, power, and importance of these things. We get hung up on shame stuff. Like, we've been dealing with the colonization for so long. By the way, it was all very intentional. To teach people to worship the other and to doubt themselves. There's so many quotes, and I didn't build them into the PowerPoint, but they're easy enough to find, where British colonial officials are saying, I haven't found a single pauper, beggar, or anything in this entire continent. We will never conquer this place unless if we can convince them that everything British is better. Then they'll become what we want them to be, a dominated people. That's the kind of stuff they were saying. It's a pretty close paraphrase of the quote I was just looking at. As a result, we have internalized this stuff. The Ojibwe, by the way, were never defeated by the French, the British, the Americans. But there's so many Ojibwe kids walking around thinking, oh, and being told, winners write the history books. That's not you. You're a defeated and conquered people. And people just believe that. We shouldn't have books like Lies My Teacher Told Me that actually sell, because there have been so many lies that our teachers have told us. But there are. As a result, and I think this, by the way, comes even broadly out of the Abrahamic religious traditions, like that there's a right way and a wrong way, that you're doing it this way or you're going to hell kind of stuff. Even in our secular thinking, we get hung up on I am less than, I am judged. It immobilizes our conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion because someone's so terrified of exposing an ignorance or offending someone, they retreat from the conversation entirely. And for Indigenous people, We are right where we should be, having been through all of the crap that we have been through. A third of our people being adopted and fostered out, residential boarding schools, a pernicious and persistent assault on our culture, cultures, languages, ways of being. So let's take it easier on ourselves and let's take it easier on each other. You are a complete, fully realized human being. You are a soul who has a body. You are the one that your ancestors were praying for and waiting for through the generations. You've been given a unique set of gifts, and you yourself are a gift to the world. With that perspective, it is so much easier to just lean in. Words matter, language matters. We are not a nation of immigrants. We are a nation with immigrants, with Indigenous people, and with enslaved Africans in its origin. What a difference one little word makes. Instead of a nation of, a nation with. I understand that many people who say things like we're a nation of immigrants is trying to say we're all in it together, but not quite realizing how marginalizing that can be to Indigenous people. Also to Black pain for those for whom their ancestors did not choose to come here voluntarily. By the way, you could apply this this frame to any fault line in our society. America is not a Christian nation. It is a nation with Christians, also with Jews, with Muslims, with Sufis, with traditional Native Americans, atheists and agnostics, all of whom are just as American as anybody else. It is the effort to say that America is any one thing and pick some subset of the society that will be immediately marginalizing. So we have to be careful how we frame things. Native people have transformed the whole world that we live in so many different ways. Think about the foods Native people shared with the rest of the world. That's not even a complete list. Corns and everything we eat, drink, and drive. Potatoes, staples for Russian and Irish food now. Tomatoes. Imagine how that transformed Italian cooking. You pretty much have to do away with the lasagna, the spaghetti, the pizza, and the Mediterranean diet. There are so many ways to look at the empowered contributions we've made to the rest of the world. Our economic landscape is complex. In 1969, 57% of the Native population was below the poverty line. 57%. When you flash forward to 2020, it was at 23%. Tells you two things. One is 23% is too high. That's gross. That's unacceptable. That's an indictment on America, not Indigenous people and our lack of a work ethic or something. It also means we just shaved 34 entire percentage points off of Indigenous poverty. That is the fastest growth rate out of poverty for any group in the country. If you want to know something about how to disrupt, not just interrupt, but disrupt systemic intergenerational poverty, ask Native Americans. We have the best track record for doing exactly that. Here in the state of Minnesota, there are 11 federally recognized tribes who are the largest employers in 16 Minnesota counties, including the county you're in right now. Be nice to natives, you probably end up working for one someday. And we still got plenty of problems that need plenty of attention. But when we understand and see it this way, instead of, I work in the education universe and I care about Indigenous learners, oh, those poor people, what can I do? And we end up developing a Jesus complex or a paternalistic approach to the work. How can I reach out to those poor people and help them through the gates and gaps so they can be good at the whiteness? When really, we should be, how did they do that? Can that be scaled up? Can it be applied in other places? What do I need to know? In addition to, here's what I know and what I can contribute. It moves us into partnership collaboration, shared learning, instead of paternalism and pity. I really like this Abigail Echo Hawk quote. We are not a historically underserved population. My history is one of ancestors who survived so I could thrive. My history didn't start with Western civilization. I am colonially underserved. I am institutionally underserved, and I am historically resilient. I'll give you a minute or two on me, but I won't give you too much because I got a couple other cool things to share with you. These are a couple folks in my family tree. John Smith, of all the ironies, to native dude to get that name. No connection to the one from Pocahontas mythology. He was born in the late 1700s. He died in 1922. He was here in this state before any white settlement and still here when the soldiers came back from World War I. Wabujig, kind of a famous warrior in the Ojibwe world. I never had a way to talk about this when I was going to school, but it bothered me the older I got that I could go to school for so many years to learn whatever I needed to be successful in the world, and none of it had anything to do with me. It was kind of like the message being delivered by kind, good-hearted people trying to help me was screaming at me through the absent narratives. And the absent narratives were saying, you and yours aren't important, aren't relevant, don't matter. Because if we were important, relevant, or mattered, somebody would have said something in all my years of education. I went all the way with mine. But there was nothing. I never had an Indigenous educator. K-12, college, master's, up to my PhD, and I finally had my first Native educator. The effects were profound. Fight, flight, freeze. We're scratching our heads because it felt like the continuation of an age-old assault on our very way of being. People are scratching their heads. How come we got truancy problems with these students? How come we got discipline problems with those ones? And I'm like, that's flight. That's fight. How come these ones are spaced out, zoning out, and hanging out at the Indian Center? And that one's freeze. And it's humans, and we're complex, and it's not quite that simple. But these are things that impact the work. These are some pictures of my father, who is not Native at all. So I show up really brown because my mom, but I got some features where I can be kind of racially ambiguous for my dad. He was an Austrian Jewish immigrant and survivor of the Nazi Holocaust who spoke beautiful German and English. And he was a transplant. He was the only person in our family on his side who made it out of there and ended up with grandchildren. This is how the Native dude ends up with the German last name with 3 vowels in a row. There's more to say about his story, but I'll save it. My mom grew up in a little village called Bena on the Leech Lake Reservation. It's population 400. Half of them are my cousins. That's not an exaggeration. And I think for her, hunting, fishing, gathering was not a cool cultural pastime, but more a necessary means of survival. And they'd even pull all the kids from school for wild rice harvesting, fishing, hunting, things like that. When she went to school, she was born in the Catholic Indian Hospital on the Leech Lake Reservation. She lived there her first 18 years of her life in the village of Bena. And there are 10,000 tribal members at Leech Lake. And she didn't meet a single professional Native person her entire childhood, except for one person. Out of 10,000 people, they couldn't find one to be an educator, a social worker, a banker, a police officer, anything. The one person she met was the school nurse, and she thought, maybe I could do that. She went on to nursing school, got a nursing degree. One of her first jobs is working for our tribe's health program, and she thought, wow, even here, we're getting pushed around. Enough of that. She went back to school and got a law degree, became the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. And when I was a kid, she'd bring me with her to court, and she'd say, you sit there and don't say a word. So I'd sit there and not say a word. Couldn't remember her cases. But what I remember is she was the only woman in court. And she was the only Native person in court, she and her law partner, Paul Day. And I came walking out of there thinking, you know what? We can do stuff. It's the D in the DEI. It matters. Diversity, representation, role models, all of it. Your employment practices. We just had the retirement celebration for her law partner, Paul Day. And I had to tell him, you were the first Native man I ever saw doing something professional. And I grew up in a Native space. But we were then assembled in a room about this big full of people who were Native judges, lawyers, social workers, and educators. I said, look how far we've come and how much further we have to go. Share a brief story or two. How Deutsch Zeit do I need to be on my time allotment? Is it okay if I go just a minute or two over? Or okay, I won't really wreck your agenda, I promise. One of my kids, Beja Gobenes, we have a custom when someone has their first successful hunt, where the ancient custom used to be you're living in a wigwam village, invite the whole village, cook the whole deer, and eat it in one fell swoop. We're a little scattered, going to school and work, so we will cook up some of the deer, invite over aunts, uncles, grandparents, community members, have a big feast, there's a prayer, and then instead of just eating, we will ceremonially feed the successful harvester, and we will offer him a spoon of the food, which he has to refuse and say no. I'm thinking about children who don't have enough to eat. Okay. Take another one and offer again, and he has to say no. I'm thinking of my elders who can't get out in the woods to hunt for themselves. Okay. And again. And he refuses again. No, I'm thinking of my family, my community, and people who came here today to support me. Okay. And then again, and then he can eat. And then we'll say, you just changed your life. Because up until today, you were what we call the dependent. You depended on all the people in this room to provide all of your food. But today, you provide for all of us. This is what it means to be an adult. From today on, you have a special power when you go hunting, when you go fishing, when you get a job. It's the power to gather resources. And you use your power and you think about kids who don't have enough, elders who can't get it for themselves, your family, your community, and then they take the rest of their killed, packaged up meat and they give it away so they are impoverished. But empowered. This kid, I had a friend one time complaining, my back, I can't get out in the woods. He didn't say anything. He went out in the woods, he harvested a deer, he cleaned it up, packaged it up, went to my friend's house, filled up his freezer. Friend calls, he's like, I didn't even know people remember that teaching. What an amazing young man. Can I give him some gifts? Yes. Same kid, senior year in high school, and he and his buddy are going to double date to the prom, and hooked him up with a tux. His friend's mom said, my next check, I'll get you the tux, I promise. And her car goes down, and she had to say, I'm so sorry, I can't. My son says, forget that, come on. They went to the tux place, he canceled his tux, took the money, went to the Goodwill, they bought a couple suits, everybody went to the prom. I show up to take pictures, and I'm like, where's that tux I ordered for you? Then I got the story. I said, well, son, if you would have said something, I would have rented the kid a tux. And he looked at me baffled. He said, but Dad, it's my job to look out for people who don't have enough. And so what I've come to learn is that what's in that cultural toolbox, yes, it reflects our values as a people, but it shapes them too. Culture is not in the professing of ideas, but in the doing of those things. I'll give you one last story before I knock it off here and send you out to your sessions. Another one of my kids, I have a big family. We have 9 children. If any of you like kids, you let me know. Always hunting for sitters. But I haven't shared yet that we have a big, beautiful blended family, and my ex-wife had a terrible stumble into the darkness. The kind that gets in the way for a lot of our students and people in our community. You got a student going to college? Oh man, all you need is one of the 1,000 things to go wrong. The car, the job, the family member, mental health, physical, anything, financial. There's so many things to tend to. And if you step away for 2 weeks, and come back, you are scrambling to keep up. I have a friend, by the way, he was actually the top administrator at Sacramento City Community College, which in California, those are pretty huge community colleges, over 30,000 students. They were looking at a study where, academic achievement is a pretty good indicator for, retention of a student. If somebody's getting D's and F's, they get academic holds, financial holds, all kinds of things start to snowball. So if you can get a kid to getting C's or better, you got a better chance for retaining them. And they asked the staff to do 3 things. They said, we would like you to learn everybody's name in the first 2 weeks, even if you have a lecture hall full of 400 people. We would like you to have a one-on-one meeting with all of your students in the first 3 weeks. During that meeting, we want you to tell them what we do. Here's where the writing lab is, the language lab is, retention services, support groups, student clubs and organizations, our elder and residence program, all the things we do. And we want you to, on your honor, ask yourself about every decision you make, does this affect student learning? Does painting the parking lot differently affect student learning? You wouldn't think so, but if you actually lose 4 parking places and a lot of your students of color are actually, driving to campus every day and there aren't as many spots and then they're driving around the block 5 times trying to find a place for the car, it does. They went from, I think it was 68% of the students doing C's or better to 82%. With a definable positive impact in student retention. Follow the numbers. This kid was an infant in arms when his mom fell. She got into drugs. She is, unbelievably still alive, but she's been actively using for over 20 years. This kid was the recipient of the kind of blessings and curses only a father can bestow. He has no memory of being held by his mom. I had to restart so many times. There too, the culture stuff was so helpful. We had a little ceremony to bless an eagle feather and hang it on the southwest corner of the house. I said, this will keep us safe even when it's storming. Sometimes it would start to storm. He'd run outside through the rain, do a lap around the house. I'm checking on the feather. I'm like, okay, seemed to reassure him. There are so many things, like we have a ceremony, what we call a bear smoke. We build a miniature wigwam, put little offerings in there, each member of the family. And he'd be running around in the woods playing. He'd stop and look at it. Then he'd smile. And I remember thinking with some trepidation, there's so much beyond my control. Like even one time, I shouldn't say more than one time, I was pretty overwhelmed, up to 7 kids, single parenting. And take the kids out to eat to a buffet. I remember one time trying to get his coat on him. He's got big fists, and I couldn't get him through the coat. And I was like, all right, baby, what's in your hands? Oh, I got the mac and cheese. And he's like trying to smuggle 2 cents worth of mac out of the buffet. And I'm like, how resi can you be? Like, come on. And but then I'm like spiraling, like, oh no. Is he going to have food issues? Like his mom can be taken, anything can be taken. So now he's going to be hiding food between the mattresses and I was always worried, like, is he going to deny himself opportunity for the sake of familiarity? Or will he run from everything and everyone? Or will he self-destruct? There's no way to protect him from all the things. He ended up being a very outgoing kid. He ended up joining show choir, which is our equivalent of Glee Club. I had to watch every episode of Glee with the kids. A little bit of a lift for me, but And I was teasing him when he was going into that in like 9th grade. And I was like, it's going to be like that show. Everybody who's dating at the start of the year, they all switch by the end of the year. And there's going to be a lot of crying and a lot of drama and hugging. And then there's going to be a great big trophy. It's going to be awesome. Shut up, Dad. It won't be like that. You don't know. I was like, okay. I had to miss his first out-of-town meet. I said, I don't care if it's 1 a.m, you call me. And so I got the call late night, which I wish I could have recorded because it starts with, Dad, I love you. I'm like, I love you too, son. How's it going? I got like a dozen spontaneous I love yous out of this kid. And he's like, I love you. We won! I love you, Dad! Everybody's crying! They're all hugging each other! I'm like, I told you! And then things are going well, but then, pandemic, show choir is canceled, prom is canceled, girlfriend's canceled, life is canceled, blah. And all kids have to break from their parents. And I told him, I said, look, it's a tough time too when they do that, to lose influence over your kid for a couple of years. Because it happens a little later with the boys in general, and that's right when it's time to develop launch plans. So I said, all right, you don't have to have any version of success that I come up with. You just have to have a version. My job is to support you. If you're open to some coaching, I'm in, but that's not required. So he's sulking around for a while, and finally he said, okay, college. I was like, yes. He said, I was thinking Dartmouth, because, of all those Ivy League schools, that's the one with some decent native programs. Part of me's thinking, okay, 7% of the people who apply to that school get in, but my job is not to close any doors, it is to support. He had to do his essays, and it was a profound experience. He wrote about our family. My father, who he's close to, was a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. My grandmother, on my mom's side, had gone to residential boarding school. He wrote about his mom, times when he was mad, times when he was sad, times when he couldn't feel anything at all, except maybe guilty because he couldn't feel anything at all. And then he said a couple of the most profound things I've ever heard from a teenager. He said, we are more than the sum of our tragedies. And all this trauma, it stops with me. From a teenager. Took us a little while. We got this.
Let's go! I'm so happy for you. Oh, my boy. Oh, I miss Let's go! Come here,
Evan! Still snow on the ground. No. That was about more than a kid getting into the college of his dreams for us. I think, people have said things to me like, you saved those kids, you pulled them out of the darkness and stuff like that, and it never felt quite right. It was more like the other way around. Every time that kid was running around the house and checking on the feather or looking at the bear smoke or finding a way to sing through it all, he was restoring my faith in the decency of human beings and our resiliency in our ability to overcome everything. I didn't save him, but he saved me. For all of us. I work at Bemidji State University. I turned down the jobs that could pay a lot more money because helping kids across that stage makes a tremendous difference. Everyone is another victory over Andrew Jackson. Truly. I have learned too, it helps and heals young people as they find their way to success, but it helps and heals us too. This is noble work. It is important work at a major inflection point in our country's history. It's like that old Margaret Mead quote, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Who would those thoughtful, committed citizens be? And I am looking at them right now. I believe in this work. I believe in all of you to do this work. My mom used to get a lot of questions. My youngest brother is a medical doctor. By the way, we consider him the loser in our family. My sister got a law degree. She's a judge now. Another brother with a PhD. She'd always get the questions like, how'd you do that? Straight out of Bina. Like, there's so many things. And she said, I have no idea, but I do know this. I believe in education. but not just from books. I made sure they knew how to harvest maple syrup and hunt and fish. They all got their first kill feasts, because nothing can stop a Native person who knows who they are. I blew my time allotment. I gotta let you go to the bathroom and shuffle to your sessions. I will be around all afternoon. Thank you so much. Have a great conference. Miigwech. Thank you. Thank you.